Question period. I recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government has completely lost sight of the things that matter to Saskatchewan families. They're more interested in their own political games, and they're shutting down anyone who stands up to them. They're more interested in politics than in taking care of Saskatchewan people. And we see that on every issue, but nowhere is that more clear than on the cost of living.
Right.
This government has hiked taxes and power bills at a time when families are at a breaking point.
Right.
Why won't the Premier cut the fuel tax and give families a break at the pump?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. And as pointed out by the member who read the last member statement, it is very encouraging for Saskatchewan that our CPI has dropped 1.5%, which is almost half of what the national average is, Mr. Speaker. But when looking at what the members opposite are suggesting on not collecting the carbon tax or the fuel excise tax on fuel here in Saskatchewan, we made other choices. Every province makes choices of what they're going to do for affordability, Mr. Speaker. We chose not to collect the carbon tax on home heating, Mr. Speaker. We chose to reduce personal income tax. We chose to have an active families benefit. We chose to have a graduate retention program. We chose to increase the seniors' income plan. We made a number of choices for affordability in Saskatchewan, and if you should turn in the budget document to page 75 and 76, he will see that Saskatchewan is the most affordable place for a family to live in all of Canada.
Yeah. Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, this Premier is failing to deliver on the cost of living, and he's failing to deliver on education. We're joined today in your gallery, Mr. Speaker, by Taya Thomas. She's a mother who's seen firsthand this government's failure to invest in classrooms and the impact that has on our kids. Her daughter, Mayel, used a wheelchair and had special needs that could not be accommodated in the school system. Sadly, Mayel has passed away, but Taya is fighting to make sure every kid gets the supports that they need at school. What does the Premier say to parents like Taya who are being failed by his Sask Party government?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to welcome Taya to her Legislative Assembly and thank her for advocating on behalf of students around the province, Mr. Speaker, and I want to pass on my personal condolences to her for the loss of her daughter. You know, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to supporting children in this province, Mr. Speaker, this is a government that has made significant investments in the last number of years, Mr. Speaker. In this budget, Mr. Speaker, we've added another nearly 15% of funding for classrooms to support, in the classroom supports funding, to ensure that students of all abilities, Mr. Speaker, that school divisions have the funding to work with those students and families and make sure that those supports can be provided, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, that is tired spin in the face of tragic loss. Taya fought hard to get the supports that Mayel needed, even in the face of cuts forced by this tired and out-of-touch government. Now, early on, Mayel had access to the early development program offered at her school. But because of Sask Party underfunding of public education, that program that Mayel and other children counted on was cut. So parents like Taya had to pay for many of those supports out of pocket. This minister likes to talk about record funding of education. We hear it every year. If he thinks his government is doing enough on education, why were those supports for children like Mayel cut?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can assure the member opposite and everyone here today that supporting children and families is a major priority of this government each and every single day, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite derides many of the measures that we have put into the budget this year, Mr. Speaker. It is record funding, $356 $0.6 million for classroom supports funding distributed to all 27 school divisions around the province, Mr. Speaker. We understand that school divisions around the province are going to make different decisions on how that programming is offered to residents and families in communities all across this province, Mr. Speaker. But this is a government that is serious about ensuring that there are adequate classroom supports, Mr. Speaker. We're serious enough to sign a multi-year funding agreement with the 27 school divisions and the Saskatchewan School Boards Association to set that as at a minimum floor of supports funding for the next 4 years, Mr. Speaker. You've heard both the Premier and I speak that this is a floor. We know that there needs to be more investment, Mr. Speaker. We added to that in a significant way in this year's budget, Mr. Speaker, and we look forward to continuing investing in the classroom.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan used to lead the nation in per-student funding of public education. Now we're in 10th place. That's dead last. That is this government's record. When Mayel was in her school, extreme heat in the spring and the fall would cause her to have seizures at school. Taya had to fight tooth and nail and eventually had to pay out of pocket to get an air conditioner installed just to keep her daughter healthy. The teachers did everything they could, but this comes down to a lack of funding from this tired and out-of-touch government. Does the minister think it's okay that schools in Saskatchewan are getting so hot that they're causing seizures for medically vulnerable kids like Mayel?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We fully understand as government that we want to ensure that the schools that our children go to each and every single day are adequately prepared and adequately equipped to meet the needs of our students, Mr. Speaker. That is why we are investing over $216 million just in this budget year, Mr. Speaker, in school capital, Mr. Speaker. Another $50 million, Mr. Speaker, for preventative maintenance renewal funding, Mr. Speaker, again distributed to all 27 school divisions. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that has built 69 new schools, 32 major renovations since we took power in 2007, Mr. Speaker. This is a government that is very serious about capital improvements around our schools, Mr. Speaker, a record that member opposite derided again at committee last week, Mr. Speaker. Even the PMR funding, Mr. Speaker, the money that school divisions use to improve systems and ensure that buildings are comfortable for students and staff, Mr. Speaker, that PMR funding didn't exist under the NDP. Today, that funding level is at $50 million annually, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, Taya isn't just concerned about what happened to Mayel when she was in the school system, she's concerned about her other children too. Her daughter has 28 kids in her grade 1 and 2 class. Can you imagine that, Mr. Speaker? 28 young children in grades 1 and 2 and one teacher with 28 kids trying to learn. It's not acceptable. When will the minister accept responsibility for the mess that they've made of education and for letting class sizes in our province get out of control?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank Taya again for continuing to speak on behalf of her children in this province, Mr. Speaker, as well as the children all over the province, the nearly 200,000 kids that attend pre-K to 12 school around this province, Mr. Speaker. I'd be happy to meet with Taya after question period to further discuss her concerns and to work with her on how we can address the specific situation that she is concerned about, Mr. Speaker. But when it comes to addressing the size of our classrooms in this province, Mr. Speaker, as I answered in my last question, we are making significant capital investments, Mr. Speaker. Again, since 2007, 69 new schools, 32 major renovation projects, Mr. Speaker, numerous minor capital projects all around the province, not to mention additional dollars announced just a couple months ago for more relocatable classrooms to address significant growth that we're seeing in our two major cities, Mr. Speaker, as well as a number of communities seeing significant growth around the province, Mr. Speaker. We know that these are challenges, Mr. Speaker. These are challenges, quite honestly, Mr. Speaker, that come with a growing province, a growing economy, Mr. Speaker. But this government is committed to addressing those challenges. We've added significant capital investment in previous year's budget, again in this year's budget, Mr. Speaker, not to mention the operational dollars that I've spoken about before. Again, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to a province that is seeing growth and going to address the challenges of that growth, people can count on this government to do so. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Mr. Speaker, I guess that minister's talking points will have to be comfort to a grieving mother sitting in the gallery. Mr. Speaker, Taya is a constituent of mine. She lost her daughter, but she's still fighting to make sure that kids in Saskatchewan schools can get the supports that they need. When Mayel finished at her elementary school, she was told she couldn't go to high school because the developmental needs classroom was full. Taya was asked to give up her spot so another student should attend. Does the minister think that it's acceptable for parents to be told that their children can't go to high school in Saskatchewan due to a lack of supports?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, certainly as government, we recognize that every child in this province has a right to education, Mr. Speaker. That may look different in different communities and for different children, Mr. Speaker, but we understand there's a right to education, and we are committed, again, to working with our 27 local school divisions to ensure that they have the funding that they need to meet the needs of their children and their families, Mr. Speaker. Again, Mr. Speaker, we would encourage all parents to be engaged with their local school divisions, be engaged with their local school communities, understand, Mr. Speaker, how they can work with those groups to meet the needs that their children have, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as I said in a previous answer, I'd be happy to meet with Taya after question period and just get a little bit more context and understanding of her specific situation and how we can work with her. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Did the minister just suggest that a parent of a medically vulnerable child needs to better engage with the school system? Clearly, Mr. Speaker, the member has not had very many interactions with parents with medically vulnerable children advocating for them in Saskatchewan schools. The lack of support for children with special needs here in Saskatchewan is appalling. Mayel should have had those supports in school, Mr. Speaker, but those supports were cut. Therapy supports, cut. Her music teacher, cut. Speech pathologist, cut. Special program support, cut. All as a result of the Sask Party's underfunding of our education system. That is what this boils down to, Mr. Speaker. What does the education minister say to parents like Taya, engaged parents like Taya, who see the supports for their children cut year after year under his government?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've had the privilege of meeting numerous parents around the province, Mr. Speaker, of all different sorts of families and makeups, Mr. Speaker, and had the ability to try and understand exactly the needs and challenges that we're seeing all over the province, whether that's here in Regina or in Saskatoon or in smaller communities all over the province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that there are challenges in the classroom. We recognize that there are challenges in terms of a growing enrollment, Mr. Speaker, and challenges that we're seeing in terms of complexity in the classroom, Mr. Speaker. That is why, as a government, again, we have significantly increased school operating funding, 8.8% to our 27 school divisions, so that those school divisions have increased resources to be able to better support students and families all around the province. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to parents being engaged, every parent should be engaged, Mr. Speaker. However many children they have in the system, Mr. Speaker, whatever the abilities or situation that their children find themselves in, we would encourage all parents to be engaged with their local school division.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Taya has seen the impacts of the cuts under this government firsthand. She saw them through the cuts for the supports that Mayel needed, and she sees them every day in the lack of supports in the classrooms of her other children. Saskatchewan is a rich province, Mr. Speaker. There is no excuse. It should not be this way. It is a choice, and it is a choice of that minister and members opposite, and it's time for a change. Mr. Speaker, why? Why has that minister let things get so bad in Saskatchewan classrooms that teachers are taking job action and parents have to come to the legislature to have their voices heard?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, let's be very clear here. The investments that I've outlined in previous answers, the investments that I've outlined out in the Rotunda and in various media appearances around the province, Mr. Speaker. These are investments that we can make as a government because we have a strong and growing economy. Mr. Speaker, things look different in the past in this province, Mr. Speaker. We previously had an NDP government in this province, Mr. Speaker, that was closing schools, that was seeing declining enrollment, Mr. Speaker, that was having to make choices to fire teachers and reduce the services available, Mr. Speaker, to the students and families of this province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in contrast to that, we have a government today that recognizes there's challenges, is making significant investments to support children and families, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in a previous question, speech-language pathologists were mentioned, Mr. Speaker, and I would point to the announcement, the budget announcement that the Minister of Advanced Education made on March the 20th in terms of adding an SLP program, an OT program right here in the province, Mr. Speaker, so we can train Saskatchewan residents to serve Saskatchewan students going forward.
Hear, 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 hear. Recognize the member from Regina Elkins Stone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, for months we've been pushing for answers from this tired and out-of-touch government on the Thrift Lodge Motel. That's the second motel connected to the member for Regina Northeast, one of the top hotels used by the Ministry of Social Services to house vulnerable people, and where the nightly rates are inflated more than any other hotel across the province. But it wasn't always that way, Mr. Speaker, as we learned last night in committee. For 3 years beginning in 2018, the Ministry of Social Services used that hotel 0 times. And then after the election, this minister has handed out nearly $350,000 to the second hotel connected to his office mate. How does the minister justify spending so much public money at motels connected to this Sask Party MLA?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Speaker, myself and the ministry appeared in estimates last night for quite a long time. Again, tonight, Mr. Speaker, look forward to that. It was confirmed in that meeting when this subject was brought up. I am not involved in any procurement of any hotels or anything else, Mr. Speaker. That is done by our valued public servants as well as our third-party mobile crisis workers, for example, each and every day who make those decisions, Mr. Speaker, when someone needs a place to stay. We also heard, Mr. Speaker, that I directed officials to look at the policy around hotels. It hadn't changed in many decades. It was the old NDP policy. We're now, the ministry is now working on a 3-quote process, which we heard about, as well as a block of rooms that an RFP process is currently underway, and that is being evaluated as we speak. Again, that was part of the estimates last night, Mr. Speaker. So we're going to continue to move forward with this new policy, and it's a pilot. We'll see how it goes forward.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Recognize the member from Regina Elkins Stone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, when you look at the timeline of the dollars paid out to motels connected for the Sask Party member for Regina Northeast, there's something that doesn't add up. Between the Thrift Lodge and the Sunrise, only $1,309 were paid out to those 2 motels total over the previous 3 years to the 2020 election. But once the member for Regina Northeast was elected, the total paid out to those motels jumped to $731,000. $1,300 before the election, $750,000 after the election. How can the minister explain this explosion of payments made to hotels connected to his office mate, the member for Regina Northeast?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of expenditures, it is required at times when there's an emergency situation, when all the other options are full. The shelter side of things, in general, Mr. Speaker, we've been the ministry has worked very hard to increase the amount of spaces in many different settings to help vulnerable people when there's an overflow situation. Hotels are used. They've been used for many, many years, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, over time, particularly here in Regina, there has been a decrease in the amount of hotels and obviously the rooms associated with that are willing to take on clients, particularly on the income assistance side. We haven't seen that on the child and family side, Mr. Speaker. So anytime there's a same amount of expenditures but less facilities willing to take those on, those expenditures will go up in each of those remaining particular hotels. So, Mr. Speaker, we've been over this many times. Here on the floor, again in estimates last night, we're coming forward with a new policy, however.
Recognize the member from Regina Elkins Stone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, we haven't been over this many times. We got these numbers last night, so I'll ask again. $1,300 before the election, $750,000 after the election. How does the minister justify paying out so many public dollars to the member from Regina Northeast?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, as I said, I don't pay that out. That is done by officials within the ministry, Mr. Speaker, and so that process has been talked about. But in a general sense, we have been over this many, many times, and Mr. Speaker, I have no involvement in any procurement, Mr. Speaker, or the decisions to where to put clients in vulnerable situations, Mr. Speaker. I've asked that member several times, what is the amount per night that she would be not willing to go over, Mr. Speaker? She won't, of course, say a number. I think this proves, once again, this is all about politics for the NDP. They're once again putting politics over people.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, in 2018, there were $0 paid out to the Thrift Lodge Motel. In 2019, there were $0 paid out to the Thrift Lodge Motel. In 2020, there were $0 paid out to the Thrift Lodge Motel. Then in 2021, after the election, $46,000. In 2022, up to $164,000. The following year, the first half of the following year, up again to $140,000 for just the first half of that year. On trend to far surpass the year before. Zero before the MLA was elected, $750,000 after he was elected to this Sask Party government. Mr. Speaker, why did the payments to the Thrift Lodge only start after the member from Northeast was elected and after that minister assumed the role of Minister of Social Services?
I recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, unfortunate the member is choosing to play gutter politics here in the Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I've answered this question many times before, asked and answered, Mr. Speaker. Over time, unfortunately, the number of hotels, particularly in Regina, has decreased. Therefore, the amount paid, if there's a similar amount of clients needed, Mr. Speaker, then that would result in higher expenditures per hotel, Mr. Speaker. I know the member likes to make allegations on the floor of the Assembly. I encourage you to make those same allegations out into the rotunda and see how that goes, Mr. Speaker. But again, the ministry has come up with a new policy, Mr. Speaker, to ensure we're looking after vulnerable people. That to me is the most important part, of course, and that will continue. We want to make sure that vulnerable people are looked after, but of course get the best deal for taxpayers. I hope this new policy will be part of that.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry that the minister finds it offensive that he's being asked questions around basic accountability, but surely it says more about him than me. Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan people deserve answers and transparency when it comes to their public dollars. Saskatchewan people work hard for their money. They don't want to see public dollars wasted on inflated hotel rates at hotels connected to Sask Party MLAs. They want their dollars going to classroom supports for kids like Mayel, or to highways, or to sustainable housing, Mr. Speaker, or to literally anything other than businesses connected to Sask Party MLAs. How does the minister justify spending $750,000 to hotels connected to Sask Party MLA when there are so many other needs in this province going unmet today?
I'd like to caution the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre about making personal comments. Just take that into account. I recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of the member, of course, I'm not offended by any questions, and I'm not sure I gave her that impression, but happy to do so and done so many times, Mr. Speaker, and I've gone over this many times. When this information came forward, I took a look at it, asked the ministry to find the information the member asked for, first of all, and that was provided several times. We see the results, and as a result of that, asked the ministry to make some changes in terms of procurement, something I had nothing to do with, and officials confirmed that last night in estimates. The new policy will hopefully drive those costs down, increase the amount of units available in case there is a situation where it is needed, an emergency situation, and having a block of hotel rooms guaranteed. We'll see how that goes, Mr. Speaker, in terms of using damage deposits. Again, that hopefully will reduce the price and increase the competition.
Recognize the member from Regina Walsh-Acres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every single day in this Assembly, our members have raised the overdose crisis and the alarmingly high number of overdose deaths in our communities. With 113 deaths so far this year and counting, we don't have time to hear more of the same from the minister. They think they have it right, Mr. Speaker, but the alarming rates and the people working on the front lines of this crisis know better. How many more people must die? How many more people must our families lose to this crisis before this government realizes that they have it wrong? Today, will the minister stop with the spin, get serious and implement an evidence-based plan to address the overdose crisis in this province?
Recognize the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and this government is very serious about saving lives. This government is very serious about healing families, and we are very serious about strengthening communities when it comes to addressing overdoses and the addictions in this province, Mr. Speaker. That is exactly why we are helping individuals find the path to recovery by doubling the number of addictions treatment spaces we have available for those individuals. We are making it easier for them to access those spaces, and we are wrapping supports around them through recovery-oriented systems of care. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hear, hear.
Minister.